Thanks everybody for joining us for today's Ed webinar session, CMMC on Campus, What Higher Ed Leaders Need to Know. I'm Adam Scarzafava, VP for Marketing, Business Development, and Events here at Edge. We're really excited to welcome you for this vital topic related to compliance and security in higher education today. Before we get into the meat of today's session, I do want to just provide a bit of a briefing on Edge and who we are and why we're bringing this session together today for those who may not know us as well. So Edge is a nonprofit member-based research and education network and a technology consortium. We were founded in New Jersey by the Higher Education President's Council of the state of New Jersey. The presidents of the higher education institutions, we think pretty wisely, got together back around the turn of the century, realized the internet was here to stay, and wanted to build Edge as a resource for initially the institutions in the state of New Jersey to excel in that digital world. Our mission and our service area have really expanded throughout the region and indeed nationwide in the time since. We've got members in, well, now actually that number is 23 and growing. I need to update my slides. But we're really expanding the ways that we provide service and the geography that we cover and support. We provide best-in-class support resources for our community, and we do it by providing, under that nonprofit charter and under that mission that really comes from helping higher education excel in the use of technology. We provide expertise and we provide services and contract vehicles to help institutions excel in that space. So as we do that, we know that our approach can't be one size fits all. It needs to be customized and it needs to be focused on maximizing the outcomes for each individual institution that we work with. Every institution's mission, every institution's needs, every institution's challenges are a little bit different. And so we really exist to provide support, whatever that size, shape, and scope of challenge looks like. We do that in a few different ways. EdgeNet is our purpose-built optical fiber network. That's really the heritage and the backbone of Edge, connecting the higher education institutions in to a world-class research and education network that connects to not only our peers in research and collaboration all across the country, but peering connectivity directly to cloud providers, to really high-performance data centers, to accelerate the service that institutions can provide and the research outcomes that institutions are able to drive through the use of technology. We do that regionally. 95% of the higher ed institutions in New Jersey, and now a growing number of institutions in Pennsylvania and New York are a part of that network, and we connect them out to other research institutions and organizations all across the country. Edge Market is our strategic and informed consortium procurement arm that enables us as a cooperative pricing system to go out to RFP on behalf of not only all of the local members in New Jersey where we were formed, but institutions nationwide. And that's one of the big ways that we're expanding in that geographic scope is by providing great contract vehicles that institutions need to accelerate the way that they procure technology. We do events, networking, and community building, things like our webinar here today, but also in-person events. We host 3 EdgeCon conferences per year, all with a bit of a different thematic focus around technology. And those are great opportunities to bring a community together and really collaborate in person. And then we provide thought leadership and solution development in a number of different areas that you see here, really areas that we have grown into to support challenges that member institutions are having. And here are a few different ways that that is sort of presenting itself today. We're helping institutions think through the big AI question, administrative applications, curriculum infrastructure, whatever that looks like from an institution perspective. We're able to upfront do some really detailed assessments to help with AI strategic planning and then help to drive outcomes in that space. ADA compliance, digital accessibility compliance is huge right now. We're doing more and more work helping institutions get ready for the coming compliance changes in 2026 and 2027 related to ADA and the Office of Civil Rights. Application modernization, business process modeling and modernization, are really important right now as more institutions are moving to more software as a service platforms, more cloud-based applications for things like ERP and CRM and LMS, and all the core processes that are intertwined with those really need to be kind of pulled apart and improved to make best use of that investment that institutions are making in these big platforms and these big ticket items. So we're really encouraging institutions to undergo that business process modeling process ahead of those purchases or while those purchases are happening to make sure they're best positioned to take advantage of those investments. And then we're doing a lot of work in cybersecurity in a variety of different areas. But compliance is a huge one. GLBA over the last year or two plus has really been a big focus for our team and a lot of the work that we're doing in supporting member institutions. But compliance in general is really a key core challenge that we're helping institutions address now. And that brings us to today's core topic, which is CMMC compliance. And looking at this, additional emerging standard and its broadening application in higher ed. We've got a great team who knows compliance and CMMC inside and out, available to help support institutions in that space. And so we'll provide a little walkthrough on that today. With that in mind, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite our Edge's lead virtual Chief Information Security Officer, Dr. Dawn Dunkerley, to share a bit of an introduction. And then I think we'll pass it to Bobby for most of the content today. But I'll stop sharing my screen. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Pleasure to see you all. I see lots of familiar faces in the crowd. So if I've worked with you currently or in the past, great to see you again. If I haven't, a pleasure to meet you virtually. As Adam said, my name is Dr. Dawn Dunkerley. I'm the Principal Chief Chief Information Security Officer here at Edge. I won't belabor my background. Just know that you are about to be briefed by the best. Bobby Rogers, I've been working with for the better part of 2 decades. Don't ask him where the bodies are hidden, because he definitely is one of the ones that knows. But he is working extensively in this space. So excited to have him speak to you about what we're doing and way ahead. So without further ado, Bobby, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. As Dawn said, thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Adam. I'm Bobby Rogers, and what Adam said about CMMC becoming an emerging standard or emerging set of governance requirements is absolutely true. We've seen some recent movement with the approval of some of the final federal rules. And so what we want to do today is tell you a little bit about CMMC. I don't know how many of you have experience with it. My guess is right now higher education does not have a lot of extensive experience with CMMC. It was born out of the Department of Defense and originally intended for Department of Defense contractors. But eventually everyone who handles controlled unclassified information will have to deal with it. So we're going to go through that a little bit today and kind of tell you what it has to do with you and why you need to know it. But before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As Dawn said, I'm Bobby Rogers, and I have a background in federal government, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security. I'm an old retired military guy, so I've kind of been there and done that and seen that. And I've done all the cool things, pen testing, computer forensics, have a computer crime investigation background from the military. But probably for the past 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot more compliance work, and I've worked with hospitals, banks, other financial institutions, credit unions, private companies, and higher education folks. So I've seen a little bit of that across the board as well. And if it's a governance vehicle and it has initials, I've probably seen it: HIPAA, PCI DSS, ISO, NIST, and so on. So that's kind of me. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off so you don't get distracted, because I'll be looking at different screens. It just kind of looks weird to see somebody looking away from you. So I'm going to turn my video off, and I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if I can do this correctly.
Yeah, and as Bobby's sharing a screen, just another reminder, please take advantage of the chat. Please take advantage of the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on those and moderate some questions once Bobby gets through the content. So, and again, that's what we're here for. We're here to answer your questions, address your needs, your challenges. So please take advantage of the Q&A in the chat. All right, Bobby, all yours.
So again, our topic today is CMMC on campus. What do you essentially need to know about it as a higher education leader, as a higher education IT leader? And it's not just about IT, although it's pretty close. It's about information protection and having to meet standards. So just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the CMMC is, because many of you may not have had any experience with it. And if that's the case, you're probably lucky. We'll talk about why you need to know it now, and a little bit about history. I'm going to try not to bore you with some of the more esoteric, deep details about CMMC, but I do want to mention the history a little bit because it's relevant. And of course, the Cyber AB, those are the folks who run the CMMC program, and the different information types. And that's one of the keys to being CMMC certified, is knowing what type of information you're using and processing that belongs to the federal government, and more importantly, where it lives. And then we'll talk about the certification process itself. Now, I'm going to tell you straight up, I am not an expert on CMMC at all. I don't believe in the word expert. There's no such thing. But I can tell you a little bit about the experience I have. As I said, I've worked with Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security extensively. And one of the jobs I have had and still have is to help organizations navigate the CMMC certification process. Primarily Department of Defense contractors, but at least 2 universities so far that I could tell you that are working on CMMC that I've helped with. So I've got a little bit of experience with it, but I don't know everything. So feel free to ask me questions. And if you know things that I don't know, I will tell you straight up that CMMC is rapidly changing. Every other day I look on the CMMC website and something new has popped up that wasn't there 2 days ago. The regulations have changed, the model itself has changed. So it's possible in some respects that you may know a little bit more about it than I do. And if so, please feel free to bring that up. Please feel free to ask questions. And if I don't know the answer, of course, I will get you the answer. So having said that, let's go ahead and move on here. So first of all, the big question is, what is CMMC? And if you know what it is, you're probably 10 steps ahead of already. And you know what possibly a daunting task it's going to be to get CMMC certified. So it stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And pay attention to that phrase, maturity model. I'll tell you a little bit more about that here in a minute. It's a formalized maturity model, and the U.S. government has imposed it on federal contractors, actually beginning with Department of Defense contractors, and anyone who is in possession. And by possession, I mean they store, they process, they receive, they transmit government information. And this is unclassified information. We know that beyond Department of Defense contractors, there's plenty of other agencies who have controlled unclassified information. And when I say controlled unclassified information, the other word for it that we probably use out in the real world is sensitive information. So you can look at it like that as well. It just really depends on what people consider sensitive information. And for better or for worse, you have to go with what the government says in their case, since they own it. So if you have any of this information, there are requirements that have been imposed on you to protect it. And the whole reason we do this, you can go back probably a couple of decades and look at the news. And the ones that make the news are the ones where classified information has been compromised. A contractor, accidentally lost, controlled defense information on our missile launch systems or something like that. You see those an awful lot, but what you may not see as much or may not pay attention to as much is the fact that a lot of this information is just sensitive. It's not classified. It's really doesn't have anything to do with, the space-based laser or missile defense or anything like that. Some of it's personal information. Remember the whole VA debacle a couple of years ago? As a veteran, my information was lost. Information has been lost by the companies that do the security clearances for the United States government. They've had several breaches. So most of the time you hear about it, it's usually about personal information or healthcare information. But as we'll see in a moment, there are different types of information that is still sensitive that we need to protect. But this is the whole reason the government developed this. And for years, we've been imposing requirements on government agencies. And now we're seeing where the government is imposing requirements on everybody else outside the government. Again, beginning with DoD contractors, but it's going to extend out to everyone eventually. So a minute ago, I said pay attention to where I talked about the maturity model portion of this. Now, from an academic perspective, to me, a maturity model is kind of a scale, a measurement scale that you look at to see how well you're doing something, how well in depth or detail, and what your what your maturity is with that process. Think of CMMI if you've heard of that. I will tell you that I firmly believe that CMMC is more of a compliance requirement than anything else. Yes, there are aspects of a maturity model to it, but make no mistake, this is compliance. This supports federal regulations that you must obey, the law. And very often it's a go, no-go type of situation where you're either compliant or you're not. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well, but I don't want there to be a mistake. This is compliance. So what does CMMC do for us? Well, for the government rather, it certifies that organizations, and I'm going to use that term loosely to apply to anybody who has government information, DoD contractors, higher education, private companies, whatever, any organization that has in its possession controlled, unclassified information, sensitive information. And what the government wants to do is certify organizations, formally certify them that they have met a set of rigorous requirements and that they are compliant with the law. Now, you may have heard of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and that's the regulation that covers the government's rules and regulations having to do with contracting services, buying products and goods and so forth. But there's another aspect of that DoD uses called the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, or DFARS. And you don't have to memorize this, and you don't have to know this. There won't be a test at the end of the session, but this is the law that you must be compliant with. And CMMC helps to enforce that law and makes sure that you are compliant with it. Again, it's meant to certify that an organization, after going through this rigorous process, are compliant to different degrees, and we'll talk about that as well, with the requirements of these federal acquisition regulations, also compliant with your contracts. And that's going to be a core of what you're going to learn today is the contract makes the difference. So again, CMMC imposes these requirements on organizations that possess government data. And by doing that, what they're saying is you're going to obey these security control requirements, minimum security control requirements, if you have government information. Again, folks that use, process, store CUI. As of recently, and it's actually been a requirement for a while, but now as of recently, we've seen the final federal rule published that makes it a requirement in contract language with anyone that is going to be in possession of sensitive information from the Department of Defense. Previously, the DoD could put the requirement in the contract language, or it might decide not to if they felt it wasn't applicable. Now it's going to be a requirement. In some cases, the requirement will say you have to be certified to a certain level. In other cases, the contract may say you are not required to be CMMC certified. Either way, it's going to be mentioned in there. Now, this formal certification that I'm telling you about, this is a formal process, a lengthy process, a complicated, complex, and convoluted process, if you will. I mean, hey, it's the government. So if you expected less than that, then you might be disappointed. So it's a formal certification process, and it's conducted by an approved independent third-party assessor, meaning that for the most part, someone has to come in and audit your organization and its security controls. There are exceptions to that, and I'll cover those shortly. Now, here's the thing. This is one of the two most important things I have to tell you today. The first is why it's important to you, why you care about this. Some of you are not DoD contractors. Some of you may never do business with the Department of Defense. But I'll tell you that this is the beginning. This is the beginning of CMMC moving across the federal government. Today, it's the Department of Defense. Tomorrow, it will be NASA. The next day, it will be the FDA. The next day after that, it might be Department of Commerce or Department of Education. It's eventually going to spread to the entire federal government. That's the overall long-term strategic plan. But again, your education institutions, what do you care? You're not building anything for the government. That's not necessarily the truth. Here's why it's important to you. Think about all the data that you collect from your association with the federal government, no matter which agency it is. Lots and lots of data that are controlled, that maybe you don't treat it as controlled today, but you will one day. Manufacturing, a lot of higher education institutions get contracts to actually build things and do things for the federal government, which involves exchange of controlled information. Also think about the academic programs that you're involved with, where you may be the recipient of federal data that helps the academic process along. And also another important reason is research. There's so much research that goes on now in higher ed that really requires the participation of the federal government, or requires its data, or more importantly, requires that it adhere to certain requirements in order to get that data or receive federal funding. That's why it's important to you. So if you weren't a Department of Defense contractor and you thought, well, who cares? You will start caring if you receive this data and you have to start taking care of it. So I'm going to bore you just a second, not very long, I promise, with a little bit of CMMC history. CMMC has been out now for about 5 years or so. It was developed jointly by Carnegie Mellon and Johns Hopkins, and a couple of other companies. MITRE, I think, had a hand in that. Because again, there were too many instances of DoD contractors and others that were just losing information. It was getting compromised. It was getting out there. There were so many breaches that the government decided, hey, we need a program to impose on civilian private companies that have our data. It made sense. So it was developed by these folks, and it was initially announced in July of 2019. Well, today is 2025. So you can tell how long it took to get a mature process going. And of course, I probably didn't mention this before, but the government moves extremely fast. We all know that for a fact. So 6 years is probably fairly quick to get something of this massive effort moving. We had a couple of different versions that were not mature and not ready for prime time. Version 1 out in 2020, a minor version out in 2020 because somebody realized something was probably misspelled incorrectly. And had to change it. And then the version that we're dealing with now is version 2. And there were significant differences between version 1 and version 2. Again, I'm not going to bore you with it, but version 1 wasn't very user-friendly. There were more controls to have to deal with. It wasn't practical for small business contractors to do. And it was more compliance-based than even it is now. Whereas with version 2, we have a little bit more leeway, a little bit more room for risk mitigation instead of straight compliance. What's brought on this new set of discussions and why we think it's important for you to know about now is these federal rules have been tossed around and drafted and redrafted for 5 years now, 6 years now. Finally, the final CMMC rule blessing everything and saying, okay, we're good to go. We're ready for prime time. Just came out September 8th. And it begins implementation in just over 5 weeks, November 10th. And so I've already heard the alarm bells go off from a few customers and so forth. Oh, wow, we have to be CMMC certified by November 10th. No, you don't. I'll tell you what that means in a moment, but essentially it just means that the government's getting serious about it and they're going to start putting the language in contracts. That's what it means. We do have a phased in approach that the government has put out for CMMC compliance. That's the good news. Controlling all this at the top of the food chain is someone you will become acquainted with and need to know about. And this is boring stuff too, but it's relevant. The CMMC accreditation body, they've changed names a couple of times. Now they're called Cyber AB this week. The Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment directed that the Cyber AB be created and they manage all things CMMC. And so that's what they do. They also manage a couple other programs that we're not going to go through today, but they maintain the CMMC model and the methodology. Again, this is a formal model. There's a lot to this. So they are the folks responsible for making changes to it. We're listening to the customer base. They also pick the people who are going to come out and assess you and certify you. They certify individuals, they certify companies, they bless them and say, okay, you're certified to go out and assess an organization for CMMC compliance. They're the ones also who make the final determination as to whether you are certified or not. They handle the official assessments. They also do consulting services. And they do the training for all the organizations and all the people that handle CMMC. So they pretty much take care of everything. It's a very closed ecosystem, to be perfectly honest with you. A little bit about how they're constructed. Again, you don't need to know this. There's a couple important details here, but you don't really need to know this until you start dealing with CMMC. You have the cyber AB at kind of the top of the food chain, and they're broken down into 2 or 3 different organizations. 3 here, I think I have mentioned. You have the third-party assessors. Those are the groups of people, usually private companies, who come in and formally assess you and audit you and say, okay, you're good with CMMC, you're certified, or nope, sorry, you're not, and you need to fix things. Those are the folks that you will see at the very end. But there's another organization, the Registered Practitioner Organization, or RPO. Those are the folks you probably need to be engaged with all along while you're trying to get CMMC certified. Those are the helpers. Again, private companies usually, or even individuals that will come into your organization and advise you on how to be CMMC certified. They'll help you out with assessments, documentation, and so on. If you look at the blue part here, these are the individuals that make up these organizations. You have certified professionals, certified assessors. For the practitioners, you have the certified or the registered practitioners. I became a registered practitioner early on in the 1.0 version of CMMC. So I've helped a few organizations out prepare to get CMMC certified. And then they also have a monopoly on the training providers. These are the companies who provide training materials for CMMC, who train the RPOs and the C3PAOs. So they kind of have the cyber AB kind of has a monopoly on a lot of these things. Again, it's a very closed ecosystem. So that's how they're organized. The 2 you need to care about the most are the C3PAOs, which will do your assessment, and the RPOs, which will help you along the way. So one of the things that CMMC talks about is protection of controlled unclassified information. I've used that term several times before I explained it to you. Sorry about that. But it's nothing more than sensitive information. However, it's sensitive information that's formally defined, formally categorized. That's what you need to know about it. And there's 2 main types. There's federal contract information. And it's hard to describe these to a degree because each contract is different and will tell you what your contracting agency, whoever your government customer is, they will tell you what they consider to be your CUI. But the first category is federal contract information. This is like sensitive information light. It's stuff that you would exchange during a normal course of a federal contract. It might be contract requirements. It might be labor rates. It might be just generally protected information that's not typically disclosed to the public, unless you go through a Freedom of Information Act request, but it's not really serious in terms of highly sensitive. That is where the actual formal definition of CUI comes in. I'm not going to read this to you. You can all read this later. It's just information that the government says requires a higher level of safeguarding using recommended minimum security controls. And as the bottom 4 very long sentences will tell you, it excludes classified information. This is not a program for classified information. So if you came expecting that, you came to the wrong door, and you should probably go look for that somewhere else. There are a slew of other regulations and programs that cover classified information. So if you're If you have access to that because you're a Department of Defense contractor or because you are doing classified research, that's a whole bunch of other stuff to worry about. And you'd think that unclassified information would be much easier to deal with. You'd be wrong about that, to be perfectly honest. It can be tough just to protect unclassified information, just sensitive information, to the level the government would like you to. All in all, and this is a second important thing I will tell you, your contract controls everything. Whatever your contract involves, whether you're building something for the government or you're doing research and you have access to sensitive information, the contract is going to tell you what specifically you have in terms of controlled unclassified information, how you will protect it, what certification level you have to protect it at, and so on. And that's where this November 10th deadline, or not really deadline, comes in. Is from now on, the contracts are going to have this in there, whereas the past few years, they haven't always had this, because this has kind of been a great big experiment on the government's part. But now you will have to see that in the contract. Okay, I'm going to give you some information on where you can find out more about controlled unclassified information. And I'll include a references slide here at the end here, but by law, CUI, and that's what we call it. It sounds like the sound a goose would make if you ask me, but CUI is required to be protected under executive orders and other laws. So where do you find out what CUI is and if you have any? Well, there's a couple of different sites, and one of the most popular ones is the National Archives site, the CUI registry. And you can go through here and click on these different categories, and it'll tell you whether a particular subcategory is considered controlled unclassified information. I will tell you, you can't always go by this because it depends on the level of depth of the information. For example, if you look here at toxic substances, that's considered a CUI category. Well, I mean, you might have general information on a toxic substance that you're using for your research, but you may not have very specifics in terms of, let's say the government was going to use it to, well, I don't want to use that example. Let's don't use that example. Let's say that the government was trying to figure out a way to control toxic substances and deal with hazardous waste. That might be sensitive information that goes beyond just knowing what the toxic substance characteristics are. So that might be considered more sensitive. So while this lists CUI categories, again, the contract is going to be very specific and tell you what is considered CUI. So this site, the National Archives CUI registry, lists these CUI categories, and here's the link, but I've got a slide at the very end that gives you this again. You don't have to know this or write this down. So that's my spiel about what CUI is. And the reason CUI is important, the reason the types of information are important, is they will drive what CMMC level you are required to be certified at, if that makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it will in a few minutes, hopefully. Here's some examples of CUI, the non-complicated version. Anything about critical infrastructure, power grids and hydroelectric dams and things like that. Financial information, not just personal financial information, but sensitive information about the government and how we do budgeting and things like that. Law enforcement information is considered controlled unclassified information. Again, not just personal information, although that is considered sensitive, not just someone's criminal record, but information on different organizations and what their capabilities are and where their deployments are and things like that. Personally identifiable information, of course, is sensitive. Healthcare information is sensitive. Government contracting information, and again, that's a big category that's kind of nebulous. Your contract might clarify that for you. Some other examples, if you want to dig even deeper, the National Archives source is one of them. FIPS 199, which stands for Federal Information Processing Standard. If you're familiar with government publications, the FIPS 199 tells you everything you ever needed to know about any type of information and how it's categorized. So all this to saying about information really drives what, information types really drives what you're going to be getting certified at. So let's get a little bit more into that. Let's talk about the certification process. And forgive me if I talk too fast. I'm a native of the state of Alabama. And of course, everybody down here talks real slow. So when I communicate with other people, I have to speed up my speech a little bit so I can be understood. So if I'm talking too fast, somebody just tell me. So CMMC provides for independent assessors. And when I say independent, they have to be blessed again by the Cyber AB. And there is a defined, formalized methodology so that there will be consistency in their assessments and their audits and standardized requirements. So if you get assessed by one C3PAO, 3 years later, if you get assessed by a different one, there should be consistency in how they did that. So consistency and standardization is one important thing here. The process requires compliance assessments and risk assessments. And I say that in the plural because it might entail many different assessments, practice assessments or self-assessments that you conduct yourself or with the help of an RPO, or multiple assessments from a C3PAO if say you don't do great the first time around, you'll get reassessed. It also requires a lot of documentation, and this is the fun part for IT folks, by the way, is that we hate to document anything. So there has to be documentation artifacts that show that you're compliant with the NIST controls. And I haven't brought those up yet. I will in a moment. So please don't think I'm talking about something just yet that's irrelevant. It's not. But the documentation artifacts have to show that you're compliant with the NIST controls. Now, there's 3 levels of certification, and I'm going to repeat this a little bit throughout the presentation. So if I speak too fast and you miss it, you'll see it again. There's 3 levels of certification, levels 1, 2, and 3. And again, they are based on, wait for it, the information types you have that you must protect. And your contract determines that. Again, that's one thing I'm going to repeat that you're going to have to know is your contract determines that. Going and looking it up in the publications is good, and it will do you, it will give you a benefit in that you'll kind of know what to expect, but ultimately your contract is the arbiter of that. So I'll talk about this a little bit more here in a moment, but for level 1, you perform a self-assessment, and that sounds pretty easy, and it is comparatively, but there are requirements you'll have to go through to perform this self-assessment, and there's documentation you have to provide, and then you have to provide the results of that self-assessment into a big database in the sky called SPRS. You have to get an account on that and register as a contractor, and there's a whole litany of other things, but that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. In any case, you have to perform the self-assessment to be level 1 certified, and that's only about 15 controls. For level 2 and level 3, you have to be, one of 2 things can happen. You can be certified by a C3PAO, or you can do a self-assessment. But again, the contract tells you that that's what's going to happen. Not all contracts require certification by the C3PAO. Some self-assessments are allowed for level 2, but it depends on your government customer and the contract. I will tell you this is rare. This is not the norm. If you're trying for level 2 and definitely level 3 certification, you're likely going to be assessed by the third party, the C3PAO. To get back to the NIST thing I mentioned a minute ago, hopefully most of you are familiar with the NIST controls. If you're under the GLBA compliance requirement, then you should be very familiar with the NIST controls. And I'm talking about the National Institute of Standards and Technology special publications, 800-171 and 800-172. I will tell you that you're going to get confused about something really quickly when you start digging into CMMC. And that is, for GLBA, you have to be compliant with NIST with 800-171 revision 3. For CMMC, they have not made that jump yet. They are still on revision 2 officially. And there's some differences between those 2 publications. So if you're under both of those governance vehicles, well, then there's some deconfusing you have to do as you go. And we can talk about that offline if you like. But for now, you need to know that for CMMC, it is revision 2, and there's a companion publication, 800-172, that adds some additional controls. Here are the NIST publications you probably need to be familiar with for CMMC. I'll just briefly tell you about them. You've got the good old 171. Again, these are the controls that you most likely will see often for GLBA, just a different revision, revision 2. There's 110 controls in this publication that you have to have for level 2. For level 1, it's only 15 of those, but it's cumulative, as I'll tell you in a moment. So 110 controls in revision 2. Then there's 171A, and that's for auditors and assessors to show you how to assess those controls to determine if you're compliant with them. And I always tell people, use the 171A to your advantage. Go in there and see how they're going to assess you. What are they looking for? Then there's the 172, which you will not see unless you're going for CMMC level 3. These add a few more controls because level 3 is a much higher degree of protection, depending upon the type of information you're processing. Also depends on the contract if they require it. And then there's a companion version of it, the 172A, which tells you how to assess those controls. So two of these publications you're going to see more often than not. The other two, the 172 and 172A, you're only going to see those if you're, for some reason, going for level 3. Again, doesn't happen very often. So let me see if I can muddy the waters a little bit more here. Here's how the model is constructed. For level 1, you got to meet 15 controls, and these are in 800-171. And that sounds simple off the top, and by and large, it should be. These are usually common sense controls. Do you control access? Does everybody have an individual account? Are you not using group accounts, which you shouldn't be? Are you taking away admin from your users? I say simple controls, but we all know that's not necessarily simple things to do. But there's only 15 of them. For level 2, you go beyond those 15 controls. They're still in there. So you have 110 controls in 800-171, revision 2, that you're going to have to meet for level 2. But again, it does include the 15 controls. So as you see, all these are cumulative. You can't go to level 2 unless you're at level 1 already. And likewise with level 3, there's a total of 134 controls required for level 3. And that's where the 800-172 comes in, 24 additional controls. That's probably not going to happen very often unless you are working on a program that's highly, highly sensitive. But then that would make you think, well, if it's highly sensitive, why isn't it classified? But I can't tell you the reason for that because I don't know. Again, it depends on the contract. So that's the basic model. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how this works to get more into the weeds here. There are 14 domains that correspond to the 800-171 control families. Again, revision 2. If you've been playing with GLBA, as you should, you know that for revision 3, there are 17 domains. So there's a little bit of a difference here. You've got to learn to separate this in your head if you're going to do CMMC and GLBA at the same time. Here are the domains, and it's stuff you've seen before. Access control, awareness and training, auditing, configuration management, personnel security, media protection, incident response. You can see these on the screen, or you can go look it up in the publication, but these are the common security areas we most often see in any well-managed security program. Even if you weren't doing anything having to do with GLBA or 171, you're doing a lot of these things already because those are the smart things to do to manage security. We do user awareness and training. We control access through user accounts. We have an instant response capability, hopefully. So you've seen this stuff before. This is just formalizing it and laying it out in terms of the control families and then the controls. So as I mentioned, 15 controls for level 1. Those 15 controls correspond to the FCI level, Federal Contract Information level. That's why there's only 15 required, because these aren't considered extraordinarily sensitive. So only 15 controls. Everything else is going to be for level 2 and level 3 and is for specifically for the category of controlled unclassified information. And then up to 24 additional controls for level 3. I say up to because that's up to the contract. It's up to the assessor. You may not be assessed on all 24. I always tell my customers, try to meet all 24 because you don't know. So here's yet another pretty colorful model of CMMC that I stole from one of their books, but it explains a little bit better than I just did. 3 levels, and it tells you the number of controls, what publications they're from, and more importantly for you to know is the assessment process. For level 1, it's an annual self-assessment. You got to fill out the paperwork and self-assess and certify or affirm that you meet all 15 of those controls. And then you got to put that paperwork in the big database in the sky called SPRS. For level 2, 110, and this requires the C3PAO, the independent assessor, every 3 years or a self-assessment every 3 years for select programs. And remember, I said that's kind of rare. You won't see that very often. But you also have to annually affirm that you still do it. Even though they're only going to come and visit you every 3 years, annually, you have to say that, hey, we still meet those requirements. For level 3, it's an annual affirmation. And DIBCAC comes in. I haven't mentioned that word yet. DIBCAC is the Defense Industrial Base Certification Assessment. Man, I'm going to blow this. I don't know. I do know, but I have to think about it. Anyway, they are a government agency. They're strictly government people, not civilian contractors, not a company. They come in and certify that government agencies and contractors that deal with classified information are meeting control requirements. So if you have a DIBCAC assessment, that's a big deal. I'll remember what DIBCAC stands for probably 10 minutes after this presentation is over. So let's take a quick look at the regulation flow, because of course it's got to be overly complicated. It's the government. So I talked about DFARS, which is the defense piece of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. That mandates the use of a particular clause, it's verbiage, that goes in the contract language that says, yea, verily, you must adhere to CMMC and obey the requirements of NIST SP 800-171, and probably some other legally complicated language in that clause, but it must be in the contract. So both of these regulations, both these laws rather, require the use of the NIST publications, 171 for levels 1 and 2, and 172 for level 3. I'll say that 10 times fast, by the way. And then their corresponding assessment guides. So I tried to make it a little bit less convoluted by showing you how this works in a flow, but trust me, you have plenty of time before you have to know this, to be honest. So getting back to our drop dead dates here. CMMC language was not necessarily required for the past 5 or 6 years. They had about 15 contracts they started out with as test contracts, and they wrote those for larger companies that have really big IT footprints and 200 people working for their IT department who had time to make sure that they met all these requirements, just as a test case, or as test cases rather. And we knew that over time, everybody was going to be required to have this in there, and now they do. CMMC language is now required to be in all Department of Defense contracts on November 10th. And as I said, eventually that's going to spread to the entire federal government, but we don't have timelines for that. The contract will tell you that you have a specific CMMC level you must adhere to. And this will be based on the information type and any unique contract requirements, because your customer may throw something in there, may throw you a curveball. It says, well, because of this and because of its sensitivity, you have to be level 3 instead of level 2. That can happen. If you have any existing contracts, they may have to be modified. I do not predict that will happen initially fast, because that's a painful process to get a contract mod with the government. But they may have to be modified by the government to provide a date required for you to achieve CMMC certification. New contracts that are awarded will typically require that you be CMMC certified by the contract award. So if you're competing for a contract, you got to keep CMMC in mind here. Now, is all this going to happen overnight? Again, I heard, rumors that everybody has to be CMMC certified by October 1st. Everybody has to be CMMC certified by November 10th. Well, this is what it actually is. This is the new timeline. And I did steal this graphic from the Department of Defense website, so it's not mine. It begins the 10th of November. Where applicable, the solicitations for the contracts will require level 1 or level 2 self-assessment. So you get a little bit of a break in that you can self-assess initially. Starting a year from then, you're going to the contracts will require level 2 certification. Again, it depends on the contract. You still will see level 1 contracts out there, but for the level 2 folks who have to get level 2 certified, they're going to start putting it in there. The department may opt to delay level 2 certification requirement as long as they feel like it, until they have got this process down pat. And you know that there's going to be bugs in this process. It's not going to work exactly as planned. It never does. But here's their tentative timeline. Beginning even a year after that, for phase 3, we're going to introduce the level 3 requirements. And then beginning a year after that, all solicitation for every government contract, well, at least every DoD contract, will include the applicable CMMC requirements as a condition of contract award. So if you are bidding on a contract and it says you must be level 2 certified, before that contract is awarded, you're going to have to be level 2 certified. So if that's in 3 years, guess when you should start worrying about this? If you plan on going after major DoD contracts yesterday, or at least on November 10th, because it takes a while. It's a big process. It's not just writing procedures and policies. You have to fulfill those procedures. You have to fulfill those processes or those policies you wrote. You can't say, we have this policy, so we're compliant. If your process doesn't back that up, and you say that it does, the government doesn't like that. They call that fraud. And there's already been a couple of instances, I think Dawn can tell you about one of them, that where there was some misinformation, let's just say, that made its way to the government that wasn't exactly correct. And the government came back and stomped on those folks because it wasn't true. So you don't want to send inaccurate information when you're saying that you're compliant with something. Let's talk a little bit more about the certification process. And I know I'm going over, I apologize. I only have a few more slides left. I promise you that. And I know this is such exciting stuff. There's a couple of terms. The organization seeking certification, that would be you, by the way, OSC, prepares for CMMC certification using the self-assessments or the RPOs, the helper agencies, I call them. The RPO helps you in preparing for the assessment. They help you build processes, policies, documentation. They do assessments for you. They tell you whether you're on track or not, okay? Because they're familiar with the process. They know what the C3PAO is going to look for when they walk in the door. Then after that, when you feel you're ready, you go talk to the third-party assessment organization, the C3PAO, and there's a place for this, the CMMC AB, I actually should say Cyber AB, sorry, marketplace. And that's where you go and scroll through and find someone who you think you want to be the one to come and assess you. And then you negotiate with them. And I say it's a negotiation because obviously you pay them. So then you're basically contracting with another agency to come and do an assessment for you. They come and they do it. They assess you. They say, hey, you're great. You're fully level 2 certified. Or they say, sorry, you're 107 out of 110, so no way, no going. And trust me, I just worked with an organization that came out, that failed with 107 out of 110 controls compliant. And they have 6 months to fix it. So they did not pass go. They did not collect $200. No soup for you. Either way, the C3 PAO sends a recommendation to the Cyber AB folks and says, hey, we think they're certified. And then the Cyber AB folks issues a certification at that specific level, and you're good. And all certifications and assessment information, most of that is entered by you into this big database in the sky, SPRS. And please don't ask me what that stands for at this moment because I'm drawing a blank. I'll remember it 10 minutes after we're done, but you can look it up. And also the Cyber AB will enter your certification information in there as well. And you have access to that anytime you want. Some important things to know that I think are important. This process is more compliance oriented than risk oriented. Yes, there are certain controls where you might be able to get by and say, hey, we're not doing exactly what it says, but we're mitigating the risk because we're doing A, B, and C. If they're a good auditor or a good assessor, they'll agree with you and say, okay, you're right. You're meeting the spirit of the control versus the letter of the law. But I can tell you that this is more compliance based. It's the letter of the law that counts more than anything. In certain circumstances, again, not very often, deficiencies can be placed on a risk register or a plan of actions and milestones, you might have heard it called, meaning that here's our plan to fix this problem if we didn't do well on it. The company I just worked with that got 107 out of 110 has 6 months to fix those 3. And that's their plan of actions and milestone. And they have to provide a plan that says, here's what we're going to do. Here's our plan to fix it. Here's how much it will cost. Here are our intermediate steps. And in 6 months, you can come back and assess these 3. So you can do it, but only under specific circumstances. I don't think I have it on the slide, but level 1, you cannot put any deficiencies on a POAM. They have to be fixed because they're easy. Version 2 also allows you to scope only assets that will process this particular information. This is the other most important point I need to make, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this in a second. But version 1 did not allow you to do it. Version 1 said your entire network or nothing. Version 2 says, no, we can scope this out a little bit. We can be a little bit more flexible. Your certification, whatever you get, is good for 3 years after you finish the assessment and you get blessed by the Cyber AB. You must be certified upon the award of a contract requiring whatever cert level you're after. If the contract requires level 2, when you're awarded it, you got to be level 2. There's no, we're almost done with level 2. Can we wait 6 months? No. Here's some tips and tricks for you from somebody who's been around the block a few times and knows how this works. Even though I tell you, I'm not the expert. So anything I tell you is subject to verification. You need to have somebody in your organization become the local CMMC expert. Typically a senior IT person or a compliance person, someone who's used to dealing with compliance assessments, because they're going to need to know the ins and outs of how this is going to work. That person becomes the focal point for all your CMMC stuff. And they should be the ones to work with the RPO and the C3PAO. If you get the chance, use a registered practitioner, which is an individual, or a registered practitioner organization, which is a company or a group of people who are certified, to help you prepare for this. Do not do this on your own. I do know of a company that tried that and failed miserably, and well, they're still not certified 3 years later. Scope the assessment properly. And this, again, is the second most important thing I can tell you. Minimize your assessment footprint. What does that mean? Don't include your whole network on this. Only worry about the stuff where you have sensitive information. And I know what you're going to say, because everybody says it, but our whole network might have it. We might have users in this department or that department that access this information, or researchers here, or off-site people here. If you do that, you're going to enforce this requirement on your entire infrastructure. And do you really want to do that, especially if you're on a 4,000 node network with multiple campuses? And keep in mind that you have a student network also that you cannot enforce this on. So my advice is to not try this on the entire network. Only scope assets that will specifically use this CUI defined by the contract. If you have to build separate networks with dedicated boxes and dedicated users, where they have to switch machines, then you should do that because that lowers your footprint. And if you only have to assess 10 machines, and a router out the door through your ISP, that is much easier than assessing 4,000 machines. Okay. Logical and physical separation or segmentation is your friend. Segment this stuff from everything else going on in your network, everything. You do not want, one of the things that they're going to ask you when they first walk in the door is, where does your CUI live? And if you're able to say only on these 5 boxes, this server, these 3 VMs, and only these 10 people access it for research purposes, you're in good shape. If you say, I don't know, well, it could be here. It also transits over this router, and it goes through this firewall. That's not helpful because you have to assess all those things. Wherever CUI touches, you have to assess it. Again, scope using dedicated segments, machines, boundaries, users. And there's practical common sense to this. In some cases, you can't necessarily dedicate one whole network to, this particular contract or this particular set of users. So there's some common sense you have to build in here. If you have multiple contracts, if you're able to build the networks that will support the most highest level that you're required to certify to. So if you got 10 contracts that you have to be all level 2 certified to, you could put all those information types on that one network, provided your contracts allow it. Some contracts don't allow for data mingling. Like, for example, it's very common to not allow protected health information to mix with financial information. That's very common. So if you've got multiple contracts that may require those different types of information, you may have to separate them. They may not can run on the same network. And then you're stuck with certifying 2 networks. So, but you can do it under certain circumstances. I'm almost finished. I apologize for running over. Useful information. I'll just run through this quickly. These are the things I already told you about. CyberAB, that's their website. The NIST site, where you can download the special publications. The DoD CIO CMMC site. This is where they have actually some really good information on CMMC as well. It's more of a summary type of site. I can show it to you in a minute if you like. And the National Archives site that I mentioned. So that is pretty much all the important stuff I have to tell you. And what I didn't tell you, you could fill an encyclopedia with. So I will go ahead and say, I'm going to be quiet and let you talk for a minute.
Awesome. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you for going through all that information about CMMC compliance. I think, obviously hugely valuable for everybody on the call. And we do have a couple questions. The first being CMMC right now only applies to DoD contracts and grants and does not currently involve federal financial aid or GI Bill use. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
The rumor on the street is that eventually it will. And when we say eventually, you know how fast the government works, years. Like right now, NASA is looking at adopting it, but it's probably still going to be 3 or 4 years away. Eventually, their plan is for all federal agencies to do it, but I wouldn't expect it soon.
Okay. So something for the future to prepare for anyway, and good to have your ducks in a row, but maybe not in the immediate future.
Sure.
We had a quick question come in. Is there a control form? I'm not sure exactly what slide or what content we were on at that point. Is that too general a question? Do we need to get some more detail for that for you, Bobby, or can you answer? Is there?
Well, when you say control form, is there publications that list the controls? Is that kind of what you mean? Because there are.
Yeah, not sure the context of the question. If you can follow up whoever asked that with some of the context, we can get into more detail for that. But
as backup slides, I do have examples of the controls, right?
List the controls, what they're asking for.
And so special publication 800-171, and that's what a control looks like in there.
Mm-hmm.
For example, access control, limit access to authorized users, processes.
Are we able to send this or link to this and follow up to?
I can.
The session. Okay, great. So we'll include that in the package that y'all get with the webinar recording and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but you can download these, but I'll send you the link as well.
Cool. Okay. Couple additional questions. For a public higher education institution that conforms to Title IV financial regulations and by proxy GLBA, but doesn't do research or contracts with the government, i.e., no NSF funded research projects today. What does CMMC mean to us? Is it applicable to anything? Is this
Absolutely
a
nothing.
reality, or does it matter now?
Doesn't matter. You already have to deal with GLBA, which, basically are non-requirements, very general requirements. And you have to meet the requirements of NIST Special Publication 800-171, but revision 3, there's only 97 controls there. You have to do that. But if you're not dealing with CMMC, if you're not dealing with DoD specifically, government contracts where you use their data, you don't have to worry about this. But that is probably a rare thing. Most universities, colleges, institutes of higher education are doing more government business. So if you choose not to, then hey, CMMC is not a problem for you.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's again, I guess, an eventuality if and when other other departments, other things start
Yep,
to.
that's true. So, eventually.
Okay. 2 more questions here for now, and if you have any additional questions, please keep them coming. We'll hang and answer those best we can. If your organization is expecting to require a level 2 cert from a C3 PAO, will we be expected to have a self-assessment this year until the next phase begins?
So
if you're eventually going to have to do, if you expect you're eventually going to have to do a level 2, should you be thinking about doing a self-assessment this year before the next formal phase?
You should be doing a self-assessment regardless, because you don't want to walk into the formal level 2 assessment and not know how you're going to do. You need to know how you're going to do before they come and tell you how you're going to do. One of the things an auditor wants to know is whether you've identified your own deficiencies and what your plan is to fix them. If I come in and I tell you problems you didn't know you had, that's bad. But in any case, a self-assessment doesn't hurt you at all. If you expect to be level 2 certified, do the self-assessment, and the contract may tell you, hey, your self-assessment's good enough, just fill out the paperwork and give us the artifacts. So you may wind up with that. Again, that's going to be rare probably, but yes, you should do one.
So a follow-up here to clarify, I mean, do we need to have a self-assessment submitted for this year, or should we expect to only see those level 2 cert requirements pop up next year?
So if you have to have a self-assessment because you're level 1, you likely will find out about it fairly quick. If you don't find out about it fairly quick, if they don't notify you, you need to be in touch with your government customer or your government contracts person and ask the question. But the self-assessment is going to only cover those 15 controls for level 1. Mm-hmm. If you're going to go ahead for level 2 later, you should do a self-assessment that covers all 110 controls.
Right.
But I can tell you that the contract's going to tell you what you're going to do. And everybody always wants to, hey, I think I want to just be a level 3. Well, you're shooting yourself in the foot because that's a painful process. But also, if the contract doesn't require you, they may not accept it. You're going to submit for level 3, and they're going to say, well, we only needed you to be level 1 or level 2, so go back and redo this. They want to dictate what you are.
Got it. And when we say this isn't, we do have a couple more questions, but just following up on kind of the terminology here, self-assessment, that can be, lots of institutions may have the capabilities and the wherewithal to run those self-assessments themselves, but that's also something that we can support, right? Is to come in and kind of provide an additional eye on the ball for institutions who might need some additional help with that self-assessment, right?
Right. And even with the self-assessment, there's a formality to it. There's a methodology to it that the Cyber AB publishes, and you kind of have to go through their methodology because it requires the production of certain artifacts. An SSP, for example, a system security plan, is one of the artifacts that's produced. So that has to be uploaded through SPRS. But there are other things too. So just saying, hey, I'm going to self-assess and this is what I think, probably wouldn't do it.
And we can help to make sure folks are looking at the right things and doing that documentation correctly. So that's another kind of side of the support Bobby and his team can provide. We do have a couple additional questions here. If you have a federal grant or contract, should you just assume that all the data that you process can be considered CUI?
No, you should go back to your contract or talk to your government person, because if you assume all data is, then you're probably going to overprotect and overextend yourself protecting systems that may or may not require it. Certainly, you're going to be more secure if you just decide to protect everything you've got, but it may not be required for certification. And you also want clarification in that you don't want to miss anything. If every piece of information you get through a federal grant is considered CUI, then your contract should tell you that, or at least your government person should be able to tell you that. Does that make sense?
Yep, got it. Thank you. And then last question we have in for now, if there are any last minute ones that want to slide in under the wire, feel free here. But a quick follow-up, can you provide examples of typical CMMC covered contract work? Just want to see, want to be able to check in with our senior leadership team to see if anyone is aware of something that I on the IT team may not be, as far as needing to be covered by CMMC.
So I can give you some generic types of scenarios. Higher education is one that's a little bit hard to pinpoint other than research. But if you've got a contract to build, say, a component for a defense system, even if it's an unclassified component, some kind of widget, likely the specification data is going to be sensitive. The manufacturing or build process is going to be sensitive. Let's say you're doing software application programming for something. That process is going to be sensitive. The code itself would be sensitive. Those are a couple of examples. Research where you're required to produce kind of a summary or a given result, or determine a given result, might require it, because the information both coming in and going out of that process might be considered sensitive. So it's kind of hard to nail down one. I can tell you, from my experience with defense contractors, but not necessarily, it's kind of hard to nail down with higher ed, except for research or government contracts where there's manufacturing involved.
Gotcha. Okay, and then the last question we have for now, crystal ball time. Any thoughts on how a federal government shutdown would potentially impact the timeline shared earlier in the presentation?
Wow, crystal ball time. So the correct answer is, of course, I don't know. But I would think that, this is just a guess, please don't hold me to this, that there are prioritizations going on, even as we speak, with government services and how they are treated, how they are maintained, and what's a priority to keep going, what's not a priority to keep going. So could it slow it down? I honestly don't know that CMMC would be one of the biggest priorities that you were going to work on if you ran out of money and had a shutdown. But the rule will probably still take place. That's already in stone. Will anybody be in the office to support it or really care at the moment on November 10th? Maybe not, but you will see it. I don't think it will appreciably affect CMMC, because likely when November 10th comes, you'll hear a lot of crickets anyway. And then you'll just start slowly seeing the contracts that you go out for come in, just because the government works so fast, So I don't think it's going to appreciably impact it, to be perfectly honest.
And I guess idea being that those timelines and rules and things are still in place. So even if the lights are out when those dates first hit, when the lights come back on, you're still going to be expected to.
If we're still in a government shutdown next year, about this time, about November 10th of 2026, when those rules, come into effect, we got bigger problems than CMMC.
Bigger problems, right?
Much bigger problems.
Fair enough. Okay. So yeah, no additional questions in at this time. Dawn, I saw that you shared a few different links to some of the stuff that Bobby was referencing. Really appreciate that. Any additional color that you want to add around any of those links or kind of stories or case studies on compliance and enforcement?
Yeah, actually, to the previous point that that Bobby made about the effects of a shutdown, I think personally that we've already seen effects on the timeline associated with the full adoption of NIST 800-171 revision 3 for GLBA purposes. I think we have already seen not a stop, but a slowing down of the timeline associated with that. But the difference with CMMC is, and I shared a couple of links already associated with higher ed organizations that have been affected by, saying and self-assessing that they were doing one thing when they weren't, because it's already being enforced, and because that already has been at least not fully but partially put in place, and they have been enforcing it actively. I, to Bobby's point, don't think that it will be affected to the links that maybe GLBA enforcement will in the future. So yeah, and by the way, I love when Bobby starts the presentation by saying, I am not an expert, because he's modest to a fault, I will say. But no, we definitely can help out anyone who has any further questions or is interested in seeing how they're doing on this. Just let us know. I anticipate, pending catastrophic implications of a shutdown, that we're about to see a lot more activity in this area. So great job, Bobby. Always proud of you. And let us know if anyone needs any help further.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I've already been involved in a couple calls with Dawn and Bobby, talking to research institutions who are coming up against some of these challenges with self-assessment. So we certainly are standing by and ready to help any of your organizations meet these challenges. I'm going to drop in the chat just for everyone's reference, and if you want to grab it there, we'll also send in follow up this contact information for Michelle Ferraro and Aaron Brink on the Edge member engagement team. Both great resources to be able to reach out to and get plugged in with, to be able to schedule some time with Bobby and Dawn to follow up. So with that, thank you so much for everybody for spending the time with us. I know we went a bit over, but we had some great questions there and got to explore lots of great information with Bobby. Bobby, thank you for sharing your expertise. I'll reinforce what Dawn said and say, I think you're being way too modest, because that was a great exploration for everybody here of the dynamics related to CMMC compliance and how they're going to become more central to the mission of higher ed and research in higher ed. So thank you so much for the time, Bobby. Thank everybody for the time you spent with us. We will be sending the recording of the session if you want to be able to refer back to it. And yeah, otherwise we are here to help. So please don't hesitate to reach out to anybody on this call or to Michelle and Aaron, whose contact info I shared in the chat. And we will talk to you directly. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
If you're at EdgeCon, come and meet Bobby in person. He loves to talk about CMMC, so just come and talk to him about CMMC.
Yeah, anybody who's going to be around on October 8th and 9th, we'll see you then, and you can bend Bobby's ear in person. That'll be exciting.
Quite.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.